The most dangerous moment in a person's life doesn't always come with sirens or screaming. Sometimes it arrives on a quiet Tuesday night, wearing the face of someone you trusted, holding a glass of bourbon and a smile that says they've already won. Gavin Wexler thought he had married a safe, quiet, ordinary woman. Good for the background, good for the home base. Not exactly the kind of woman who commands a room. His words, his mistake. What Riley Adams had actually built, in the years he spent networking and name-dropping and chasing men who treated people like commodities, was a multi-million-dollar tech company, a legal fortress, and a silence so precise it could stop a man mid-sentence and make him forget every word he was about to say. She didn't explode, she didn't crumble. When he delivered his verdict, that she was too ordinary for his world, she folded her towel, looked him in the eyes, and said nothing worth arguing about, because some truths don't need defending. They just need time. And time in this story had already done its work. The lesson? Don't confuse someone's silence for surrender. The quietest people in the room are often the ones who have already won. If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's been sleeping on their own power. You never know whose day it might change. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the sole purpose of delivering meaning, insight, and a story worth remembering.
It all began with a simple request from Bryce, my boss, delivered without him even looking up from his screen. He called it a special project, which was his code for something I shouldn't mention to legal. I was to receive a file from his contact, some guy inside the marriage of a competitor's co-founder. Bryce said it was a $34 million play, and my one job was to accept the file and ask 0 questions. He didn't seem excited or nervous, just possessed by a chilling confidence I'd always mistaken for genius. It's the quiet stillness of a man who's already decided how the game will end. He saw my hesitation as just rookie anxiety. I realize now it was my conscience putting in its 2 weeks' notice. He thought my silence was obedience. It was, but it felt more like an admission of guilt. There was no dramatic briefing on corporate espionage. It was just the low hum of the servers, and Bryce explaining this was how titans clash. He framed it as aggressive intelligence gathering. I filed it under career-ending felony. The file appeared in my encrypted inbox close to midnight. Bryce had been out for scotch with the source, Gavin, a guy he was supposedly mentoring at a rival firm. Men like Bryce and Gavin called themselves visionaries. I was beginning to think of them as well-dressed idiots. I was at my station, a detail he found predictably diligent. My task was to move the file to a ghost server, to, as he put it, decompress it from the immense pressure of its journey. The scene he painted was one of tactical genius. The one I was living was of profound and willful ignorance. In his mind, he was being generous, letting me witness a master at work. My role was to translate his nod into a clean data transfer. He wasn't giving me a lesson. He was documenting my complicity for the record. The entire scheme, if you could call something so clumsy a scheme, hinged on the intel from his asset. Bryce Danner builds empires. The whole street knew that, and he collects people as if they were stock options. His new mentee, Gavin, was an eager student. Bryce had asked him, point blank, why a man on his trajectory was letting his wife's little tech company get in their way. He needed a weapon, something to prove they were unstable. Gavin delivered this file not as a betrayal of his wife, but as an inescapable market reality. Bryce had expected me to ask questions, to show some kind of resistance. He got none. I just completed the transfer with a steady, robotic efficiency that he mistook for professionalism. He didn't realize he was watching the first stage of our own firm's implosion. My only question was a quiet, "You trust the source?" His response, a condescending smirk, was the most honest thing he'd offered all night. He conceded the point. To him, the man was practically family. He told me he chose me because I was reliable, a solid foundation. He then went on, explaining that not everyone is built to operate in the moral gray areas required for real success. He meant it as a high compliment. He was, in his own narrative, the seasoned mentor, guiding my evolution into a killer. He thought he was helping me understand my own capacity for ruthlessness. The target was a company called Hawthorne Grid Solutions. The file was their confidential deployment schedule for a new contract. Bryce had never bothered to learn the specifics of their tech. To him, it was a hobby that had suddenly become an inconvenient competitor. He'd always dismissed them as a cute little business. That morning, the business was about to close a $34 million deal that we planned to torpedo with their own stolen data. I had it on my server. It didn't feel cute. So while a woman I'd never met was executing a deal that would triple her company's valuation, my boss was in his office rehearsing the speech that would destroy her, a speech built on my crime. His total lack of ethical concern was, to me, an insult to my intelligence. I expected a fight to justify it. He, however, had already determined the risk was a rounding error and was beginning the liquidation. Instead of arguing, I gave him 2 words: "It's ready." He heard loyal competence. I heard the quiet click of a trap I had just set for myself. My voice was a flatline. He was offering me a chance to argue for my own position on his team. I declined the invitation to have a spine. The emotional rush of a corporate kill he was expecting was set for the 10 a.m. boardroom presentation. The office felt profoundly still, the dead calm before the storm. He refused to entertain the idea of failure. I retreated to my desk, mumbling something about an early meeting. Bryce remained in his glass office, a king surveying his domain. He assumed I was just nervous. In reality, I was already drafting my resignation in my head. I'm sure he slept that night, the deep sleep of a man utterly confident in his own story. He never bothered to follow up and see if I'd wiped the server clean after the transfer. He had no idea the woman he was about to publicly execute was on her laptop, addressing an entirely different kind of email. He likely assumed his source, her husband, was a ghost. He definitely assumed we were. The attack was planned for the 3rd slide of the deck. It showed Hawthorne's deployment timeline, a list of their supposed security holes, and a pitch for our superior alternative. It was the most efficient character assassination I'd ever seen. With one click of his presentation remote, Bryce launched a torpedo into the life he thought he could control. He was dreaming of quarterly projections, feeling, for the first time, that his world was perfectly aligned. The irony was about to become a punchline. The backstory he presented was clinical. A 7-year-old tech firm, a charismatic male visionary, a quiet female engineer. He painted her as the overlooked, exploitable weak link. He had the swagger, the pitch deck, the dream. He was selling a future that didn't exist yet, one where we crushed them. It's a common archetype. He lived perpetually on the verge of the next big thing. She, it turned out, lived in the architecture of the devastating present. The presentation froze. The mouse pointer vanished. A map of the city appeared with a single pulsing red dot. Bryce saw it as a simple software glitch, scared into it. He saw it as a small, safe problem. The dot was centered on our building's address. Below it, a line of code appeared, the unglamorous, essential work that makes everything else possible. He never bothered to understand it. Their software ran the digital plumbing of the world, and apparently it logged every unauthorized access. He found the details terribly dry, and more importantly, he'd assumed they were invisible. She had written the fail-safe code for our presentation. He had designed the branding for his own failure. He was the part people saw, and everyone was seeing it now. In the beginning of the ensuing silence, a woman stood up. Riley Adams. She was the technician ensuring the whole gallery didn't just collapse, but did so on his head. She listened to his fumbling monologue. She saw this as a generous gift of his time. Bryce was the artist of the deal. She was the architect of its demolition. She let him stammer about corporate security. He saw this as a generous gift of her patience. He was the risk, the excitement that pulled her into this fight. I saw it differently. He was the variable she had failed to properly account for, until now. She began to speak, bringing the executives into her world of digital watermarks and canary traps. She was teaching them how corporate espionage really worked. When she finished explaining how she'd baited her own husband into stealing a traceable file, Bryce's attention didn't just drift. It shattered. He was met with a wall of incomprehensible and undeniable evidence. A pat on the hand was all he got from our senior partner. "Sounds complicated, Bryce." Then a pivot back to the woman who had just ended him. It was a masterful, consistent dismissal. She never asked follow-up questions. She said it was because she had all the data she needed. In truth, it was because she had an authentic curiosity about just how deep a hole he would dig. He saw their dynamic as a simple business conflict, free from the messy complication of a rival who was 10 steps ahead of him. She was the pragmatist. Her role was to manage the security of her world so he could focus on trying to burn it down. A smart division of labor, he was now forced to realize, had a clear winner. We were out of the boardroom in 2 years. No, 2 minutes. Our careers were the priority, though it was clear whose career he had just destroyed. He walked back to his office. His presence, he felt, was what transformed our floor into a center of power. Our floor. Now it was just a crime scene. From that point, she handled everything. Not Riley, our managing partner. Not because of some toxic arrangement, but because Bryce was an amazing, supportive leader when winning, and a radioactive liability when he lost. That was the story he told himself. He was a vision guy, not a details guy. He lived in tomorrow. This absolved him of any responsibility for being publicly executed today. So Riley Adams got her contract, her husband got served divorce papers, and I got to sign my name on an affidavit for the SEC. He saw it as a betrayal. I saw it as the meticulous documentation of a junior analyst managing a non-performing boss. And my job was to ensure I divested cleanly. My job was simple. Bryce told me to expect an email forward, to catch it, and to keep my mouth shut. He called it competitive intelligence, a file from some guy, Kevin Adams, whose wife worked at our rival, Hawthorne Grid. That was it. I never imagined it would end here in the main boardroom with that same woman's face on a 10-foot screen and my stomach in knots. The presentation laid it all out. They weren't just showing us data, they were telling a story about how she, Riley Adams, had built a frictionless world for her husband. The right coffee, the perfect schedule, the dry-cleaned suits. She'd handled every detail so he could focus on his failing agency. On screen, a quote from her deposition appeared. He assumed my support was a feature of our marriage, not a cost. It hit me then. We weren't dealing with some disgruntled employee. We had used a man who didn't even realize his wife was the only thing keeping him afloat. Bryce had sold me on Kevin being the inside man, the overlooked genius. The presentation painted him as the lead in a play he didn't write, staged and funded by the woman he saw as a background character. And we had believed him. A timeline of his company, West Hollow Creative, flashed on screen. A joke reel of buzzword pivots and failed strategies. I'd seen decks like this 100 times. They were resumes for guys who were good at spending other people's money. They showed an IRS notice for unpaid payroll taxes. The presenter explained how Riley had quietly covered it from her own salary. Kevin's only reaction had been anger at the government for bothering him. It was a pattern. The pieces started clicking into place, one slide at a time. Every problem at his agency was someone else's fault. Every financial crisis was magically absorbed. Riley was his human shock absorber, and Bryce had convinced me to help him gut the whole system. I remember Bryce laughing about how Kevin's wife helped with the bills. The presentation clarified. Her salary wasn't a help. It was the entire support structure. It paid for his health insurance and, most months, his share of their mortgage. My hands started to feel clammy. They put up the invoice from a law firm, a 5-figure bill she'd paid to get him out of a stupid contract. She wasn't just his wife. She was his primary and only investor. The details were surgical. The internet he used for client calls was on her corporate plan. The coffee in his office was purchased on her Amazon account. We thought we were leveraging an asset, but we were just pawns in a subsidized man-child's messy life. Then came the gut punch. A growth chart for her company, Hawthorne Grid, appeared next to his. While he was picking fonts for new business cards, she was scaling from 10 employees to 30. She was landing massive infrastructure contracts. I imagined her coming home from negotiating multi-million-dollar deployments to listen to this guy complain about a client's logo. The whole setup was a lie, and I was sitting in the front row. The presenter played a clip from a party. You could see him, hand on her back, introducing her to a potential investor. "Oh, Riley? She's in tech," he'd said, smiling like he was being generous. The condescension was so thick you could taste it. It was a script, the presenter explained. He'd call her his back-end compliance manager or joke she was great with spreadsheets. A whole performance designed to make her seem small. He had painted her as a dependable bookkeeper, the practical support for his grand vision, a safe, non-threatening partner, not a powerhouse CEO who could, apparently, orchestrate a boardroom execution this precise. Those investors never knew they were talking to the architect of a system managing critical city infrastructure. The woman he was dismissing was 10 times the operator he would ever be. She just stood there and let him do it. The presentation showed photo after photo of her at his side, smiling quietly. One look from him was all it took to keep her from correcting the record. He needed to be the only star. For her to tell the truth would have exposed him as a fraud. So she played the part. She let him run his pitch. She was a team player, right up until the moment she wasn't. Bryce shifted in his seat next to me. He and Kevin were the same breed, all style, all pitch, desperate for the spotlight. Her quiet, lethal competence was something neither of them had ever planned for. The contrast was brutal. He chased applause. She built empires. The screen showed their two trajectories, diverging so sharply it looked like a physics diagram of a failed launch. Even as her company was landing game-changing clients, he'd refer to it as her little inspection software business, a deliberate verbal pat on the head to keep her in her box. The word little wasn't an insult to him. It was a category. His world was big. Hers had to be small. He mistook her silence for contentment. He bet on the wrong woman, and so did we. The story turned to a specific night. She was on her laptop analyzing a complex risk report. He was in the next room screaming at a client on the phone. That same night, she moved $2,000 to their joint account so his car payment wouldn't bounce. The next morning, he told her she seemed stressed from her little job. The entire room was dead silent. She'd been dimming her own light for years so his could shine. That was the deal. The unspoken rule of their marriage. Then came the catalyst. A news slide appeared with audio. It was a phone call. I heard Kevin's voice and then Bryce's. My boss. His voice slick and confident, agreeing with Kevin that his wife was ordinary, predictable, safe. The fallout was immediate. She started leaving for work at 5 a.m. Then she called him from her office and played the recording back to him. He had no idea she knew. His silence on the recording wasn't power. It was pure, panicked confusion. He had been caught casually selling out the one person holding his life together. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice shaking. Her reply was ice cold. "Securing my assets." She hung up. Her next call was to her lawyer. This whole presentation was the result. This was never about a divorce. This was a counter-offensive. They put up documentation showing her condo was bought pre-marriage, untouchable. Hawthorne Grid's intellectual property was registered years before she met him. Every dollar of investment was shielded behind corporate firewalls. They had prepared for this. "He has no claim," the presenter stated flatly. And that's when Riley Adams began methodically, digitally, erasing him from her life. She didn't need to get angry. She just needed to get organized. His banking passwords were changed first. Then his access to shared cloud accounts was revoked. The casual flow of information stopped cold. But the first thing he truly felt was when his access to her shared calendar was rescinded. A small digital act of war. Meanwhile, she was quietly closing a $34 million acquisition deal. He thought she was just stressed from work. He had no idea the contract she was negotiating was for the software deployment across over 1,000 commercial buildings. I looked at Bryce. His face was pale. We thought we were seeing the whole board. We weren't even in the right game. She was operating on a level we couldn't comprehend. A photo of a tax form sitting on Kevin's desk appeared on screen. It was due in 2 days. She had walked past it, said nothing. The safety net was gone. She offered no advice on his terrible pitch decks. When he couldn't find a tie, she didn't help him look. She just let him drown in the chaos he created. The invisible work that had propped up his entire existence evaporated overnight. The path was no longer cleared. The man we had used as an inside source was now completely, utterly alone. He tried to fix it with cheap charm, pouring her wine and asking about her day. But he was trying to patch a nuclear reactor with duct tape. Then his final mistake. The presenter quoted him from a Thursday night dinner. "So, how's the old compliance department? Any big projects on the horizon?" he'd asked. This time, she didn't play along. She just looked at him and said, "We are finalizing a landmark deployment partnership." She laid it all out for him in a language he couldn't understand. Catastrophic failure clauses, data migration, liability caps, intellectual property, terms that represented millions of dollars and immense risk. "The final terms lock next week," she finished. And then the presentation ended. The screen went dark and the lights came up. Riley Adams herself stood up at the head of the table, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had bet on the wrong man. In Bryce's world, you were either a predator or you were food. His ego built this filter that sorted everyone, and for a while, I really wanted to be on his side of the glass. To admit someone else had a better strategy was to admit you didn't even exist. My job is 99% predictable patterns, the orderly rise and fall of market caps. That one file from Gavin Adams was the 1% anomaly. Bryce had called me into his office, all glass and ego. He sat there, his confidence a fortress, and described a conversation he'd had with a guy inside a competitor's marriage. This guy, Gavin, had a plan to solve his problem. Bryce called him a high-value asset, someone who could get us a real inside track. The corporate backstabbing part was common. The file that he forwarded to my inbox was not. It was a complete deployment schedule. $34 million was the valuation of the company they were acquiring, Hawthorne Grid. This was way bigger than some messy divorce leverage. I reviewed the data. It was an impeccable roadmap for a corporate ambush. My job description had just morphed from analysis to accessory. I looked at the numbers, then thought about Bryce. The weak point in this whole $34 million scheme was his absolute faith in this guy, Gavin. I saw Bryce's entire plan in a flash, the hostile bid, his narrative of being the only real visionary in the space. Guys like him always believe they're entitled to a piece of whatever someone else builds. It's a move straight out of the textbook. "All right," I told him, my voice a little shaky. "The file is secure." A cold, terrifying sense of being in the game finally settled over me. Bryce's pitch to the board was exactly what I expected, a demand for aggressive action, citing Gavin's instrumental intelligence. We countered their every projected move with their own playbook, every email, every deployment date. Gavin's intel made them a ghost we could see. His supposed asset was a guy named Gavin Adams, whose wife's mentor was Bryce Danner, a man watching his own company quietly implode. I saw the rot every day, the missed payments, the systemic failures, and Bryce's desperate hunt for a technological silver bullet. And then we got the kill shot, a data file transferred from an unsecured guest network right over to my machine at Danner Equity, a network Gavin Adams had used. He was accessing proprietary files that were way outside the scope of his clearance. I knew it, and I saved them anyway. Bryce called the final presentation in our main boardroom. He believed intimidation was a valid strategy. It was a fatal error. He came dressed for a victory lap, playing the magnanimous genius. His confidence was a cheap suit he hadn't earned. He talked forever about market disruption and shareholder value. I just kept clicking through his slides, helping him walk right into the trap. When he finally finished, a woman at the far end of the table dimmed the lights from a tablet. She didn't argue. She just presented. The main screen lit up with her own data. Exhibit A, a complete forensic timeline of the Hawthorne Grid data theft. Gavin's name appeared a total of 7 times. Exhibit B, a financial flowchart of the data transfer. A singular damning trail flowed from their servers to our guest network. Bryce's practiced smile started to look like it was carved from ice. Gavin sat bolt upright, the facade of the inside man starting to completely disintegrate. "And finally," she said, advancing the slide, Exhibit C. The title was Danner Equity Breach, Internal Server Analysis. My workstation ID was highlighted in bright red. "The unauthorized access logs terminate at this point," she stated, her voice perfectly level. "Corporate espionage carries a federal sentence of up to 10 years. I felt the blood drain from my face. Peregrine's acquisition ethics clause is absolutely unforgiving. I watched the life drain out of Bryce's eyes. He looked over at Gavin as if he were a complete stranger, a ticking bomb. The entire story he had constructed for us had just collided with cold, hard reality. His big play wasn't just baseless, it was a felony. She closed her laptop with a soft, final click. The boardroom was dead silent. Checkmate. Bryce's entire career was dismantled not by shouting, but by a series of precise, undeniable, and surgically placed facts. The call from our own legal department came in under an hour. Bryce's lawyer sounded like he hadn't slept in a week. They would concede on everything. They buried every claim to an acquisition. All Bryce asked for was a non-disclosure agreement. Silence was the only thing he had left. The fallout was finalized with brutal administrative efficiency. A few signatures and they severed him from the company like a malignant tumor. I didn't want a severance package. I just wanted quiet. The space to exist without the constant weight of my own colossal screw-up. I saw her a few weeks later in a trade publication. She looked different, taller, completely occupying the space she had carved out for herself. Bryce had spent years convincing people like me to be smaller, to just follow orders. She had responded by building something monumental. The victory wasn't just the $34 million. It was the legally binding silence of the 2 men who thought she was just an obstacle. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of watching a brilliant woman's true worth be entered into the public record, completely irrefutably. Men like Bryce and Gavin write themselves as the main character in every story. Their narcissism is a terminal, pre-existing condition. Her new chapter wasn't a reaction to them. It was a return to who she was before they tried to edit her down into a footnote. My job is often about endings, closing quarters, liquidating assets, but this felt different. This felt like being an accessory to a crime. The resolution wasn't loud or triumphant for her. For us, it was a deep, internal hum of dread, of accounts finally being settled. A woman's value, dismissed by her own husband and my boss, was now quantified, notarized, and completely untouchable. Gavin called his wife an anchor, but she was the whole damn fleet. He was just the dead weight she finally had the freedom to cut loose. My job is usually just the boring guts of billion-dollar deals, all spreadsheets and PowerPoints. This whole mess started with an email from my boss, Bryce. Not with some big drama, but a subject line that just said, "Handle." He motioned me into his glass office, already staring out at the city. "Files coming in from a buddy," he said. "Don't open it. Don't ask why. Just get it onto the ghost server and wipe the email." He was already planning the kill. I didn't feel like I was committing a crime, not really. It felt like a test, a little bit of cloak and dagger stuff to get me into the inner circle. The idea this was anything but corporate hardball was, looking back, comically wrong. The buddy, some guy named Evan Taylor, sent the file an hour later. Bryce saw the email notification come through and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He wasn't just getting data, he was celebrating a knockout he thought he'd already landed. In his head, he was about to gut a rising star in the tech world. He saw this company, Peregrine North, as all hype. This delusion, this absolute faith in his own brilliant plan, was the foundation of his own downfall. The invitation for the big presentation came on a Monday. By then, everyone on the street was talking about Peregrine. Their name was suddenly tied to a valuation that made our quarterly earnings look like a rounding error. Bryce just smirked. The business journals loved them. Every outlet was running a profile on the CEO and co-founder, a woman named Riley Adams. The picture of her, poised and in total command at a boardroom table, was the first sign that maybe Bryce was in over his head. Then came the official news of their new funding round, $34 million. It wasn't just a win for her company, it was the methodical dismantling of everything Bryce had been banking on. Our own network, the same guys Bryce played golf with, was suddenly buzzing with her name. The story didn't just break, it detonated in the exact social and financial circle Bryce believed he completely dominated. The worst part, the real cosmic joke of it all, was that Paragon Software had just solved the exact logistics problem that was crippling one of Bryce's biggest investments. He was trying to short a company that was about to make him obsolete. I remember him scoffing at her photo in Forbes, said she was Evan's safe bet. That safe bet had just executed a deal that made her a titan in our industry. You could almost feel the floor begin to crack under his ego. Then my own phone started lighting up. Texts from analysts at other firms. Heard Bryce has an angle on Paragon. They were all suddenly desperate to know more about the powerhouse they'd written off for years. These guys staked their careers on finding the next big thing. And for years, the woman who was about to redefine their entire sector had been standing right there. And Bryce's arrogance had made her totally invisible to all of us. While his friends were scrambling to get a meeting with her, she wasn't taking any calls. She was getting ready for a presentation. She was about to take complete control of the story. The meeting was set for Wednesday morning. Bryce strolled in like he was about to deliver a eulogy. I'd classify it as the frantic overconfidence of a man who had no idea he was walking into his own execution. His first slide was a weak jab at Paragon's spending, questioning the $34 million figure like it was a typo. It was a flimsy, obvious opening shot. By the third slide, his tone had changed. The smug predator was gone, replaced by an aggrieved competitor. "You need to explain these numbers," he demanded of their team. It wasn't analysis, it was a public accusation. "I don't think they have the whole picture," he said to the room, a phrase meant to sow doubt. It was his whole strategy. Their success had to be a lie, because he hadn't seen it coming. "My projection is based on more complete data," he argued, nodding to me to bring up the next slide. It was the truest thing he said all day. He thought he had a secret weapon, and he was about to stake his career on it. He saw it as his checkmate moment, using her company's stolen deployment schedule to prove they were a house of cards. I saw it as Exhibit A in a federal case, and my name was all over the metadata. His next move was the kill shot. "Now, let's look at their deployment schedule," he said with a smirk. He wasn't acting like an analyst anymore. He was a corporate spy, proudly showing off his stolen goods. He gestured for me to open the file. He called it a gift from a concerned party. It was clumsy, arrogant, and about to blow up directly in our faces. But before I could even click on the icon, the conference room doors swung open. Riley Adams walked in with her legal team. That single entrance turned Bryce's big moment into a crime scene. It was a hostile move, and she met it with unshakable calm. In that instant, Bryce stopped being a shark and became a liability. He was trying to torch her reputation, and she was holding the extinguisher. Her counterattack was just one slide on a thumb drive. She found him in our boardroom, mid-assassination attempt, and his power just vanished. He was no longer a rival. He was just a liability. He stood at the head of a table where he'd made millions, looking at her not as a person, but as a final obstacle. He was there to stake a claim on her failure, blinded by a number on a spreadsheet. The raw panic as his plan unraveled was the only real emotion he showed all morning. It was also the reason his entire world was about to be systematically taken apart. In front of our senior partners, he pushed his chips in. He claimed Paragon was a fraud and that he had the evidence to prove it. He named Evan Taylor as his whistleblower. Bryce sat across the table, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Riley, I just don't see how you were hiding these operational gaps from your investors," he said. It was pure theater. He looked right at her, expecting her to crumble. He'd built this entire reality where he was the hero saving the market from her. I just waited for the floor to fall out from under me. Riley spoke first, her voice even and calm. "I haven't hidden a thing, Bryce," she said, her eyes locked on his. "The only operational gap here is in your firm's cybersecurity." He tried to argue back weakly. "We have a source." "Yes, you do," she said. "A source you made look like a fool." Her case was built entirely on his own traceable crime. "His foolishness is his," Riley said, "but your firm's is a legal issue. Your source called my company's main line, impersonated an advisor, and tried to steal proprietary data." She listed the date, the time, the exact alias he used. She had built a case not for a business dispute, but for corporate espionage. I watched the first real flicker of panic flash across Bryce's eyes. He tried to pivot, playing the victim. "We were just acting on a tip," he claimed, his voice straining. "It was a pathetic performance and our partners weren't buying it. I just never knew it would be this big," he mumbled, as if the size of her success excused his crime. Riley just repeated his words back to him, "This big," and let everyone in the room understand what that meant. My boss's argument was simple. He thought it was a small-time, dirty trick. The second it acquired a legal name, a felony, he suddenly had nothing to do with it. He started to bluster. Riley's lawyer cut him off, sliding a tablet onto the table. "I believe this is relevant," he said. It was a network analysis, showing a data transfer. He pressed play. An animation showed the file leaving Paragon's server, hopping through a proxy, and landing on a server with an IP address registered to Danner Equity Partners. My ghost server. The air in the room got 10 degrees colder. He followed that with the server access logs, my login credentials, my name. Then the file's metadata, timestamped to the exact second I downloaded it. It wasn't research. It was a digital trail leading straight to me. The color drained from Bryce's face. You can't argue with a server log, his manufactured confidence shattered, replaced by the silent, animal terror of being caught. He physically slumped in his chair. Our managing partner gave him a look of pure ice. The meeting was over. Bryce's career was over. He was escorted out by security, leaving me in a silent room with my name glowing on the screen. I heard later he tried to call the whole thing a hard reset with the partners. He blamed the market, the pressure, anything but himself. He actually tried to sell his crime as an aggressive business tactic. The audacity was incredible. He thought his past performance entitled him to their protection. But they just looked at him, and for the first time saw the stranger in the expensive suit who had just exposed them all to ruin. I'll never forget the look on Riley Adams' face. Not triumphant, not angry, just a chilling, unshakable clarity. "You don't understand," she'd said to our partners, her voice quiet but absolute. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a notification." My boss Bryce always said money was the only thing that talked. He was staring at Sarah Hawthorne like she owed him $34 million. But the look on her face, cool and still across that polished table, said she was playing an entirely different game. It was Logan, her husband, who was practically vibrating with greed. He kept glancing at Bryce for approval, like a dog waiting for a treat. She just watched him, and her expression wasn't angry. It was analytical, like she was observing a failed experiment. She wasn't looking at Logan like he was her husband. She was looking at him like he was a line item, a rounding error in a deal he couldn't comprehend. And the way Bryce looked back at him with that smug little nod, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Bryce was using this guy. I'd seen Bryce tear people apart in meetings, but Sarah Hawthorne didn't even raise her voice. She just laid out facts, one after another, each one landing like a coffin nail. Logan's face went from smug to stunned to completely blank. He had nothing. The guy just deflated. No fight, no argument. He looked around that massive boardroom like he'd just woken up from a dream where he was king and found himself in a prison cell. He was a ghost before he even left the chair. When Logan finally stumbled out of the room, I thought that was it. I thought Bryce had won. He'd broken them, and now we'd get our prize. I had no idea that Logan leaving wasn't the end of the battle. It was just the end of the decoy. The real fight started then. I never understood the quiet ones. Bryce liked loud, messy conflicts. But this woman, she was something else. A total blind spot. None of us, especially not Bryce, saw her coming. We were all there because of an email, one single forwarded file that landed in my inbox 3 weeks ago. "Just file it, Derek. Don't open it," Bryce had said. Corporate espionage always sounded more exciting in movies. In reality, it was just a drag and drop. Bryce's plan was to use the file to prove Sarah's company had a security flaw, forcing her to sell a majority stake to him for pennies on the dollar. Her soon-to-be ex was the key. Logan gave Bryce the ammo, and Bryce was ready to sink her ship. The whole setup felt dirty, but I told myself it was just business. Now, watching her legal team set up their presentation, I wasn't so sure. She was looking at Bryce with this profound, almost pitying contempt, and that scared me more than anything. Her head of security, a guy with ice water in his veins, stepped up to the monitor. He didn't look panicked. He looked bored, like he was about to explain something very simple to a room full of children. "We detected a data breach 3 weeks ago," he said, and the room went cold. A sensitive deployment schedule was exfiltrated. It was sent to a junior analyst at an investment firm. My blood turned to ice. My email address flashed up on that 80-inch screen, followed by the name Danner Equity Partners, Bryce Danner. I could feel every eye in the room swing from the screen to me, then to Bryce. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. "All executive accounts were on high alert," Sarah stated, her voice cutting through the silence. The logs filled the screen. "The breach didn't come from one of my employees." Her eyes locked on Logan's empty chair. "It originated from a deactivated personal device," her tech guy continued, "still synced to cloud backups. The credentials used belonged to Logan Hayes." The silence in the room was absolute. Bryce wasn't just an investor. He was an accomplice in a federal crime, and I was the receiver. I finally understood. I wasn't just a junior analyst. I was the patsy. Bryce had used Logan's pathetic attempt at revenge to orchestrate a corporate raid, and my server was the murder weapon. My career flashed before my eyes. Her team laid it all out. They showed Bryce's failing investments, the mountain of debt he was hiding. He didn't want to buy her company. He needed to steal her intellectual property to short the market and cover his losses. Logan's payment for this grand betrayal was probably just a pat on the head from Bryce. He'd traded his wife's entire future, her life's work, for a thumbs up from a guy who saw him as nothing more than a disposable tool. The executives from the other company, Peregrine North, looked like they were ready to commit murder. This wasn't just a divorce drama anymore. It was a catastrophic security failure that put their own assets at risk. Their top lawyer spoke, his voice dangerously low. He gave Sarah 48 hours to prove the leak was contained and not a sign of systemic failure. If she couldn't, their billion-dollar contract was dust. Logan tried to burn down her kingdom, but he forgot she'd built the whole thing from scratch. She wasn't just the queen, she was the architect, the engineer, and the entire army. And we had just handed her a declaration of war. She never once looked rattled. She just authorized her team to give Peregrine's auditors everything, complete transparency. She was going to show them exactly who lit the match, right down to the device ID of Logan's old tablet. Then her lawyer turned to us. He started laying out these huge binders on the table, articles of incorporation, patents, financials. It was a wall of paper, a fortress of facts built to withstand any assault. Her security chief put up a final slide. It was a data analysis of all company communications for the past 7 years. It showed with terrifying clarity that Logan Hayes had never sent a work email, logged a productive minute, or contributed a single useful idea. He wasn't just a silent partner, he was a ghost, a complete fiction. The case Bryce and Logan had built was based on nothing, and Sarah's team had the receipts to prove it. We weren't just beat, we were annihilated. It was 10 in the morning, and I was witnessing the complete and total implosion of my boss, my firm, and my future. I had followed Bryce into this room thinking we were corporate raiders. We were about to be carried out like casualties. I looked at Bryce. He had walked in here like he owned the world, ready to watch Sarah Hawthorne beg. Now he was seeing the trap wasn't for her. He had walked right into it, and the jaws were snapping shut around him. He came in wearing a $1,000 suit and a smile that dripped condescension. The doors of the boardroom closed behind us with a heavy thud, and I remember thinking it sounded like a vault ceiling. It was, just not for them. Their team was small, precise. Just Sarah, her lawyer, and the tech guy. Bryce had a whole team of sharks with him, but you can't litigate facts. At the head of the table, the Peregrine partners sat like stone-faced gods, ready to pass judgment. Bryce actually gave Sarah a sympathetic smirk as the meeting started. He thought he had her cornered. He thought this was his big, brilliant victory. He had no idea he was already a dead man walking. His lawyer's opening was smooth, confident, and a complete fabrication. He painted a picture of a loving partnership, of shared sacrifice and sweat equity. It was a beautiful lie, and for a second, I almost believed it myself. Then came the threat. He told the Peregrine execs that a messy public divorce would tank their launch. But if they just helped pressure Sarah into a fair settlement with Logan, everyone could walk away happy. It was pure, predatory genius. It was the moment I realized I bet on the wrong man. He was using a stolen file supplied by a bitter husband to blackmail a woman in front of her biggest client. I felt sick. Sarah's lawyer just waited, letting the filth hang in the air. "Your argument," her lawyer said, his voice flat, "is based on a false premise." He began laying out the binders, one by one. The thud of each one hitting the table was like a gunshot. The physical proof was literally boxing them in. He walked them through the timeline, the company's founding, the patents, all filed years before Logan was even in the picture. He slid the last report across the table. "This," he said, "is where your case dies." I could see the title from where I stood. Forensic Financial and Contribution Audit, Logan Hayes. Bryce's face went white. This wasn't a defense. It was a public autopsy of Logan's entire life, proving he was nothing. Logan's lawyer was frantically trying to read, but it was too late. I glanced at Bryce. His cocky smile was gone, replaced by the rigid mask of a man trying not to shatter. Then Sarah's lawyer nodded to the tech expert. It was time for the kill shot. The network diagram appeared on the screen again. "The source of the breach has been positively identified," the tech expert announced to the board. It was not a system failure. It was a deliberate act of industrial espionage originating from outside Hawthorne's network. He zoomed in on a server cluster, my server cluster. The tech guy hit a key, and a glowing red line shot across the projector screen, tracing the data's path right from their network. He said something about the device belonging to a Gavin Wexler, logged in with an old personal password. The file was stolen, screenshotted, and fired over to a server at Danner Equity Partners. My server. 4 hours after their big deal was announced. I swear I felt the blood leave my own face when I saw Gavin Wexler's go completely white. He darted this panicked look at his lawyer, who just looked stunned. Then the chairman of Peregrine leaned into his microphone, and the whole room went dead silent. He said, "We've been keeping a close eye on Bryce Danner for months." They figured he was trying to tank their launch to cover his own bad bets. All they needed was the proof. The chairman stared Gavin down. "And you, sir, just gave it to us." I'll never forget the words. Effective immediately, Bryce Danner is permanently blacklisted. He looked right at Gavin. "And whatever finder's fee he promised you for your help, Mr. Wexler, consider it gone." I watched the guy's entire world just shrink to the size of that chair. He just committed a felony for money that had evaporated into thin air, played and thrown away. His own lawyer was already packing his briefcase. And that's when I saw the genius of it. The brutal math. If Gavin fought for his divorce settlement, he'd get indicted for corporate espionage. He wouldn't just lose the money, he'd lose years of his life. His lawyer stood up and mumbled something about retracting the claim on the company. Meeting over. Everyone started to leave, but Gavin just sat there, completely hollowed out in under an hour. Then she stood up. Riley. She just smoothed her blazer and walked over to his side of the table. I saw him flinch, expecting her to scream at him. But she just said, "This is the last time my work will be used against me." She said it so quietly, with zero emotion. It was colder than any threat. After that, it was just paperwork. Facing prison time, the guy would have signed anything. Of course, Riley kept the house. He was gone. Erased. It wasn't even a fight. It was like watching a surgeon remove a tumor. 3 months later, Hawthorne Grid's project with Peregrine was everywhere, a massive success. I'd see her in online articles, celebrating with her team in these incredible new offices. All that power, all that drive, was happening right under his nose the whole time, and he just never saw it. I think about her sometimes, in that house she owns, not having to walk on eggshells around some guy's ego. She won. She got her peace back. The kind of quiet he's probably never going to see again. That was it, wasn't it? The real mistake wasn't losing $34 million. The fatal screw-up was living with a woman who was building an empire and having the nerve to call it her little hobby. That's the kind of thing that ends you, not just your job, but your whole reputation. I was just the guy holding the file, but it's a lesson I'm damn sure never going to forget.